everyone. So we're going to start with a quiz. Of all the places I've been, I heard Norway is one of the smartest. So you should be able to figure this one out pretty quickly. How are animals supposed to live? Who thinks it's the one on the left? Oh, yeah, got off to a good start. Anyone on the right? Okay. So in 1907 was the first zoo. Before that, they were called menageries, and it was all about exhibiting animals. But the first zoo was actually for the biology of animals, and it was designed and constructed in part to protect animals from all the threats of nature, to provide them all the food that they needed, and to create a space for them to, yes, procreate, very critical, particularly for some of those endangered species. However, eventually these zoos, when we brought them inside, we thought these are going to be so safe, it's going to be so easy for the animals. And what happened? What was the one thing they were supposed to be doing? You guys got this one. The procreating part. In fact, they were so, unfortunately, depressed or not incentivized for whatever reason that there were quite a few issues. And I like to say that we eventually figured it out, and we actually have created zoos now where animals can roam freely, be environments that are safe for them, and we're back to procreating. Mental health is on the rise. So don't forget that story. How are humans supposed to live? Anyone for the one on the left? No takers. All right. Perhaps the one on the right? So Homo sapiens are 160,000 years old. We've been in communities for 5,000.
Sorry, Whitney. Hallo, dere klarer vel å rekke opp handa? Den på høyre. Hvem ville heller hatt det kontoret der? Yeah, there you go. They wanted the one on the right. The room on the right.
I figured so. Okay, good. All right, so we confirmed that with data, which I appreciate. Thank you. I kind of had an inkling there. You guys were going for the one on the right. So as I was saying, Homo sapiens are 160,000 years old. We've been in communities for 5,000. We've been in cities for 2,000. And it was only the Industrial Revolution the last 300 years that has come. In the last 100 years, we traded in our horses for our cars. We traded in our pencils for our iPads and our friends for Facebook. So with this evolution, we are being called the indoor generation. And as a result of this, asthma, allergies, inactivity, mental health, isolation is on the rise. And if it continues, there are questions as to whether or not we will outlive our parents' generation. So for many of us in the environment that spend 90% of your time indoors, which means if you're 40 years old, does anyone want to raise their hand? Is anyone 40? I love this audience. Some countries, no one volunteers at all. This is great. All right, so for all my 40-year-olds, that means 36 years of your life have been spent indoors. 36 years, 90% of your life. This is not the exception. And yes, I know that you're one of the leading countries when it comes to physical activity, getting out, other ways using bicycles, et cetera, being in nature. I love the examples of hiking the mountaintops here. But you still are inside the stat of spending around 90% of your time indoors. So we have to start critically understanding that designers, planners, real estate leaders, sustainability drivers are going to actually affect how long and how well you live. In fact, we know this so well that there's 4 determinants of health. That's going to be your genetics, access to medical care, your environment, and behavior. 70% of the leading chronic disease conditions are caused by behavior and environment. That means for all of my physician friends, I'm sorry, but planners, architects, designers, engineers, you will have a greater impact on the future of the public's health than physicians. Depression is not getting fixed in the hospital. Do you think obesity is fixed there? And how about asthma? That inhaler that you're given and you go home to breathe in all the toxins in your environment, that is not going to fix it. We have to rethink about the places where you live, work, play, and heal. And the reason that I'm here is because I was honored to be invited and to really help to think about this issue from the ways of construction, because you have a huge role to play in how our environments are designed and constructed. And so James talked about the global real estate market being a $223 trillion industry. We've seen sustainability metrics around $2.7 trillion. And I've also seen health considered to be the next trillion-dollar industry. We are on the move, and you are right there. 10.5 trillion by 2023. So to give you an idea, the information technology industry is also expected to meet 3.7 trillion. So you're right on track with them. However, as much money is being pushed in this industry, unfortunately, you are losing a lot of money, and money you don't have to lose. In fact, as we track injuries and illnesses in the construction industry, there's over 340 million occupational accidents a year. To give you an idea of how big that is, as a scientist, numbers are no good without any context. That is the population of the United States. You might not realize, but one of the beginning drivers of the global health was Rockefeller. And Rockefeller was building the Panama Canal. With past year, they were pumping in massive amounts of money to really revolutionize what the future could be in shipment and travel. And of all the injuries and deaths on the job, what were they losing more people to? Yellow fever, hence the development of global health. So as much money as we're putting into it, what is the money that we're losing? And we know that overall, that's about $1.25 trillion. That's about the same as Puerto Rico's GDP. And here in Norway, you're looking at it being almost 30 billion krona per year being spent on injuries and illnesses. So who's working on this? So we know the international health organizations, your ministries of health, your World Health Organization, but who is speaking directly to you as a design and construction industry, but how we can recreate the environments that not only are good for the people on the job, but are good for the people that we're designing the buildings for. And we're really here to help you launch that with Delos and the International Well Building Institute. So in 2014, we launched the first building certification system in the world called the Well Building Standard. And this is a performance-driven system that goes beyond lighting and air quality to really transform an idea of wellness in place. Today, we are in 36 countries. As I was coming on stage this morning, I was looking at updates. We're now at 38. This changed in the last 3 days. And we have 1,002 registered projects around the world. And I'm very excited that we have a registered project right here in Norway. And we're thrilled to have our partners at Skanska helping to lead this right here. So with that, we see this investment in people, and an investment in trying to create buildings that are healthy for the people inside of it. And we see a really big push to look at health promotion, not just injuries and illnesses. However, as often as I speak to designers and architects, increasingly recently people in construction have said, what about us? We spend so much time talking about how we're going to create healthy places for them. And so in preparation today, I wanted to spend some time talking directly to you. Because health is really personal. What you eat, how you breathe, what you're thinking right now, how distracted you are, how stressed you are, what you're going to eat tonight, your relationships in your life, what you're exposed to, your light, your sleep rates, all are related to your health. So in personalizing this, I wanted to think about how wellness can be brought into construction sites. So given that 85% of companies with over 1,000 employees have a wellness program, that's a lot of money. So it ends up being upwards of $742 US per year used to incentivize people to do workplace wellness. Like, hey, you're overweight. Where's my colleague Lars that talked about all the fat Americans on the cruise boat? Yes. So as a result of that, 1 in 3 people in the US are obese. 2 out of 3 are overweight. And with that, there's a lot of promotion programs coming into the workplace saying, we need to do something about this. But very few people are actually using those programs. And we actually really need to rethink about how we can learn from this to bring better programs into the field, particularly when we have pernicious wellness issues that are on the field sites where work is transient, and this is one of my favorites. Field offices are temporary, designed for a short period of time, so why bother? Except when the project goes over, or it's prolonged, or your workforce shifts, and these problems change with it. And we have so many examples of temporary structures that were used and outused past their time to create extremely unhealthy conditions for the workers. So with that, I wanted to focus specifically on a couple of wellness issues in construction. We want to talk about air quality, dehydration, weight management, stress, and ergonomics. So the Well Building Standard looks at all these different concept areas: air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, acoustics, mind. And as we launch the WELL community standard, and as we are present in every typology that is now available, every building typology, we're also increasingly looking at safety, security, and community health. But let's focus specifically on air quality in construction sites and air quality in the buildings that you're designing. So 12.7% of the world's population will die from an air pollution issue. About 43% of that is going to happen from indoor air quality. Many people have no idea that indoor air is 2 to 5 times higher when it comes to toxic load than outdoor air. You may also be surprised to find that outdoor air is regulated. Indoor air, not so much. The idea of a sick building syndrome didn't exist until 1980. We tightened buildings after the OPEC oil crisis, and with that, we put people inside them. We increased the 80,000 chemicals on the market. We decreased regulation, and what do we have? We have sick building, with estimates of 1 in 3 buildings in the world are a sick building. So you start doing the math with 90% of your time indoors, you've probably been exposed. And if you don't believe me, there's quite a bit of science out recently, so Harvard was not the first, but has recently popularized work on understanding that VOC exposure, in particular carbon dioxide load, and VOCs directly is linked to cognitive health and function. So that means that most offices, 1,000 ppms, when it gets to 2,500 ppms or 3,000, what starts happening to the brain with that reduction in oxygen, increase in carbon dioxide, is that we have a statistically significant link to ability to have strategic thought and intuitive thought. So if you want to test this theory out, you can join me on my plane ride back to the US, because planes are notoriously up at 2,500 ppms. Of course, oxygen's also low, which is why you always fall asleep on takeoff and landing. But it's a good little experiment to do. So the majority of your air quality issues will happen from ventilation, and then also in the materials on site. So let's talk a little bit about the exposures that you have from your outdoor air supply. The big one that we're watching is PM 2.5. This is the nasty stuff. So if you take a piece of human hair, and then you look at these blue dots here, and then you look at the red dots on the blue dots on the human hair, you get PM 2.5. You can't see it, you can't feel it. But it's so tiny that it gets all the way into the alveoli of our lungs. And that is why if you are at risk for cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, you will see their actual caution days on the news that say, don't go outside, don't go running, don't expose. Because that particulate matter is getting all the way into the bloodstream, right? And of course, the impacts that has for heart disease, stroke, et cetera. We're also clearly looking at material safety on the job site. So I want to spend a moment talking about how chemicals have actually saved our lives as well. So we're not here to demonize or say that it's wrong, but there are 80,000 chemicals out there. Around 7,000 have been reviewed, 700 have been more deeply reviewed, and around a dozen or so carcinogenic. So there's a lot that you're exposed to, and we need those chemicals. We need this innovation, but we have evidence to support that it's not good for human health. We don't want to wait 45 years for asbestos to get out of buildings. Currently, Beijing and Shanghai, to my understanding, it is regulated out of buildings. Everywhere else in China, which also includes 4 of the major cities in the world, not regulated. If you don't think that the power of the transmission of that to other countries will have an impact over time, you're wrong. So how can we learn from what we know is bad? How can we use precautionary principle, and how can we get it out? If I have any leaders in the room that are really into material safety, the WELL building standard is not going to recreate the wheel. So if you're doing it well, then we want to partner with you. We partner with Mindful Materials. We partner with Cradle to Cradle. We use precautionary principle. We use health product declaration. We use all these different strategies. And James even mentioned some really exciting strategies that are being used in net zero buildings on materials to rethink about some alternatives. We look at furniture. This is a big one. A lot of VOCs were focused on adhesives, right? Adhesives and paints, but furniture has like 50 different components to it. So we're really pushing to regulate aspects of furniture on job sites. If it's old, if it's reused, it's already off-gassed. Keep in mind, everyone, VOCs, they kind of hang out around 32 degrees. So if you have furniture, wait till spring, because then you'll start smelling that new off-gassing happening. Flame retardants, we're looking very closely at halogenated and brominated flame retardants. But this is worth a note on the history of flame retardants. Does anyone know where these came from? So around the 1970s, increasingly there were a lot of burn injuries happening to children. And the doctors were noticing that there were increases in the emergency department with these burn injuries. And there was a lot of attention paid to, oh, it must be because of the pajamas are catching on fire too quickly. And then there was attention on the furniture. It must be the furniture that's catching on fire too quickly. Does anyone want to just take a wild guess who was behind those campaigns? Tobacco industry. Let's point fingers everywhere besides at us, because parents were smoking in the home. So early on, the idea was to protect children. And then we've come to understand that there's potential endocrine disruptors as part of flame retardants. So looking at alternatives. These are lessons learned, right? And we want to bring these lessons on site to well-certified buildings. So in the Well Building Standard, our air section has 29 different features, and we bring the lessons that we've learned on materials, on exposures, onto monitoring directly into those buildings. So let's spend a moment on water. This is a very significant issue. So the majority of you in this room are probably dehydrated, and you can blame that on your bad mood, because mood and dehydration are totally linked. If you're not in a bad mood, awesome. And so most people don't have access to good water. 2 billion people in the world are drinking from contaminated sources. This is the contamination. And what happens is you do not have strong biofeedback loops in the brain to actually detect what these harmful levels are. And most of the construction of water treatment plants happened post-war, so they're really good at getting a lot of the stuff out, but unfortunately by the time it gets to your tap, it hasn't. It's gone through those old pipes. And you have excellent drinking water here, excellent drinking water here. But this still remains a challenge. And many people use bottled water, and of course they love that clean taste of bottled water, which also, of course, is chlorine from many places in the world. So rethinking access, exposure, and making sure when it does hit the tap that it's actually going to be healthy for you to drink. And we want to make sure it's accessible. So there are job sites, clearly, you're aware of this in construction, where it will show you what the color of your urine is and how dehydrated you are. And this is extremely serious. I was just in Dubai, in Doha, they're dealing with massive human rights violations on job sites because you cannot be on the job site over 45 degrees Celsius. And of course, the newspaper regularly publishes it's 45 degrees Celsius when it's not. And dehydration is critical, particularly to passing out, to injuries, ability to focus on the job. So really thinking about exposures and hydration and how significant this is around injuries. And we talked about some of those impacts. Mood is one, and also short-term memory loss is closely connected to dehydration. The majority of the human body is made of water, including the brain, so dehydration is really critical. So we want to make sure you have access, we want to make sure it's filtered, and we want to make sure that what's in your drinking water gives you what you need. Bottled water will not do it alone. You need the minerals and nutrients from the groundwater long term. So nourishment. For a lot of people, when they talk to us about a building standard, they're like, I never thought I'd go into this field talking about nourishment and food. But 75% of what you eat comes from a 5-mile radius of where you live and where you work. What you're exposed to, what your friends eat, what's cheap, what's easy, what's delicious, you're going to have it because it's what you're exposed to. So design plays a critical role in rethinking about healthy places. And so, as we're talking about those fat American tourists on those cruise boats, we came to your country, and with that, we're also bringing our epidemic of obesity, and we're spreading it slowly around the world. It's also an epidemic of sedentary behaviors, and we're exposed to new things, right, within the food supply and source. I was shocked in Dubai, 1 in 2 women are dealing with obesity now. So this is definitely on the rise. Here's the global map. So you may not understand that obesity is actually contagious in nature. So it's now considered a pandemic, just like the bubonic plague. That was considered an epidemic. We made this one up. But in the 1970s in the US, we were dealing with starvation. And now we have highly caloric, dense, cheap food available that's very addictive. And now we're dealing with obesity for many reasons. So one of those reasons I wanted to highlight was sugar. So sugar is considered 8 times more addictive than cocaine. Hopefully, if you've been addicted to cocaine, you've tried to stop. Most people addicted to sugar never do. If you have sugar, around 45 minutes later, your system will crash and look for the next high. and the cycle will continue. Even when you're using some fake sugars or diet sodas, doesn't matter, your brain gets the same response. When you are not able to process your sugar load, that has an impact on insulin, and insulin, of course, is directly tied to type 2 diabetes, which is increasing around the world in concert with obesity levels. So rethinking about what you have access to on site. When it comes to human health, you never tell someone what to eat. You never tell someone what to drink. So they can do whatever they want, but as the employer, we're just going to provide a healthier option. And over time, they might actually choose it, because the healthier option becomes the easy option. So habits are also triggered by environmental cues, by who you're exposed to, by peer pressure. Where's my good friend James? So James, when I'm in the UK, they insist that the pub is actually part of the workday. It's the last part of the workday, and it's a really strong cultural issue. Millennials are now pushing the pub culture out. We've actually started to see some declines in the UK. But if you were tired, if you were hungry, and if you were stressed, your brain has just received a massive amount of cues, and you're gonna start craving salty, sugary, crunchy food. And guess what, when you go to the pub? There's your best buddy with a pint of beer, with chips, and just try to order salad and water. It's not gonna happen, right? So there's a lot of peer components, what you're exposed to, what you have access to, and that's going to trigger your different behaviors, and design plays a critical role in this, right? If anyone has a chocolate bowl on their desk, move it 6 feet away from you. It's linked to a 10-pound decrease in weight over a year's time. So this is starting to add up in dollars and cents. We spend a lot of time in construction industry at the dollars and cents, and to James' point earlier, 90% of the cost of running a business is going to go into the people. So if I can start to make any argument, the design and construction of that capital investment in place is going to start impacting these numbers, people start paying a lot more attention to us. Even increasingly, we have human resource directors paying for parts of the well building standard, because they're seeing how critical place and wellness is when they want to change the impact on their workforce. If we want to get you to be more physically fit, physical inactivity is the 4th leading risk factor for death in the world. And sitting's the new smoking, which means that most people have no idea that sitting is so dangerous for them for prolonged periods of time. Your ancestors never sat for this long, and they never sat like this. No one take pictures right now. And over time, you start standing like this, you start breathing like this, and you've actually lost your diaphragmatic breathing, you've lost your ability to get oxygen into the brain, and over time, you actually send signals to the brain, slow down, don't burn calories, no need for that, I'm sitting. And you text your friends. For us in the States, you order everything on Amazon, no reason to get up, no reason to go to lunch, no reason to talk to anyone. I'll just get in the car now and go home. And before you know it, you are an expert at making sure you have no physical activity in your day. So in the well building standard, when it comes to looking at physical activity and when it comes to nourishment, we're going to provide better sources of food. We're going to reduce sugar on site. We're also going to get you active. The stairs are the easiest, most passive intervention for you to use. You won't even notice it. And we want to get you out of your desk and not sitting for prolonged periods of time, right? So comfort is a really big one when it comes to ergonomics. So there's a lot of focus on injuries and illnesses in construction, but I think there's not enough focus is that the conditions leading into those injuries and illnesses that have to do with how you sit, obesity issues, stress levels that lead into those injuries and illnesses. Does anyone recognize my friend over here? The modern evolution of man and woman, I should say. So these are all the different areas in which we're being affected because of this prolonged sitting, by not moving our bodies in the right way. And it is extremely expensive. We're upwards of 550 billion right now that we're tracking in the US directly linked to this, and it's mostly automatic payout, which means employers, you go to your owner and say, I have a problem, and they're gonna say, no fault, we're gonna give you time and medical care to treat that. But a lot of musculoskeletal issues are long-term. And as a result of it, we see temporary, even permanent disability, which really affects the workers' earning and contractors' profits, particularly in the construction industry. In fact, so much so that every claim put forward is around 10,000 US dollars, so about 80,000 krona, yes. The last one I want to talk about is stress. So this is a really interesting one because the well-building standard looks at the mind and looks at stress. And it's been really interesting to understand how design impacts stress and stress levels. But many people don't realize that stress also has an impact on weight gain, sexual function, sleep ability over time. And you're supposed to have a certain level of stress in your life. The problem is everyone's ramping up really high and never letting down. And over time, that leads to ulcers and teeth grinding, inability to focus, insomnia. And also, increasingly interesting is the suicide rate for construction workers is 53.5 per 100,000 workers. That's 4 times the rate of the general US population. And we searched out some terms here in Norway, so I'd be very interested to see. Because that stat is scary, 4 times the average. In Australia, our partners at Lend-Lease with Barangaroo, which James featured, of all the focus they have on injuries in the workplace for their construction workers, the #1 issue they're dealing with, suicide on the job. And why? What's happening with stress or inability to manage stress? Or what's even happening with bullying or discrimination or lack of community? These are all related to well-being, and we can't fix it all through design, but we can start to rethink about how place matters to start to support the environmental stress issues that people are dealing with on the job. These are all the ways in which the well-building standard looks at the mind, looks at stress, starts to rethink how humans are supposed to rev and recover in environments to handle and manage that stress. Biophilia is humans' innate connection to nature. If you think this is staring at a tree, you're very wrong. The further we get away from nature, the more problems we have with light, with sleep, with acoustics, all of it, with recovery, with stimuli management. So how do we bring nature inside and do it strategically? Even if it's not real nature, there's other ways to bring it inside. This is a big one, locus of control. There's so much focus on creating a perfect building for everyone. I'm often like, you're never going to. You can't. People are too diverse. What you do is you create a building, you create a place, and you create a workplace environment that allows people to choose what they need. We're extremely adaptable if given choice. If you take away choice, and we sit at a high gray partition with gray carpet, and we can't see the window, and we sit for 8 hours a day in, day out, over time, that will impact your health. We look at stimuli management. So you're not the same person from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep. That has to do with cortisol levels, your endocrine system, your sleep-wake cycle, your ability to focus. Some of you love coffee shops, right? Some of you hate coffee shops. Some of you love them in the morning but have to leave in the afternoon because the human brain does not want the same level of decibels throughout the day. We have different work, we have different needs, we move. But if you sit me in one spot over time, you're going to see a maladaptation. So if you empower people to choose and choose different stimuli throughout the day, that's better. And beauty, wayfinding, and of course, connection. Wayfinding is a really big one. We see this in hospital campuses over time. A lot of this research coming out actually has to do with soldiers returning from combat and going to rehab and refusing to go into hospitals because they get overwhelmed with even being able to understand how the hospital works. So much so that the VA is actually starting to use virtual reality to help people wayfind through buildings. So these are examples of biophilia and the increases that you can see in productivity. Just a 1% increase in productivity has a major impact on the bottom line. We're seeing this upwards of 8% improvements in concentration, ability to focus. These are all examples, small examples, and ways that we're bringing in sleep support, interaction zones, napping. We love napping. Who likes napping? Who naps? Yeah, that's getting, yeah, awesome, okay. So this research comes from fighter pilots and surgeons who cannot afford to fall asleep. You cannot power through with caffeine alone if you want creative thought. Our brain does not do a good job at connecting disparate thoughts without good sleep. And of course, our ability to focus and reduction of errors. So 20 minutes is the recommendation. Interestingly enough, about 85% of mammals are polyphasic, meaning that they sleep, wake, like your cat. They think that we're monophasic sleepers, but if you think about evolution, that doesn't make too much sense. We'd have to see our prey coming, or we'd have to see our predators coming, rather. So what is it about these new sleep cycles? And we're rethinking that maybe it's not just sleep in the evening and wake during the day. And this is showing up with studies on NASA and looking at astronauts, alertness studies, fighter pilots, as I mentioned. We're doing mindfulness training when it comes to health. This is a study done directly on construction workers. Fascinating, published in 2018 by Huang. Really encourage you to look at this because we saw some significant impacts in performance and daily tasks and safety. So some of you love mindfulness, some of you think it's crazy. You can wait a little while, you'll see it come on one way or the other. These strategies are here to stay, and we're seeing them start even in elementary schools. So with that, we really encourage you and want to inspire healthy workplaces and buildings that you create for the people in them, as well as healthy work sites for the people that are working to create these healthy sites. So Delos is the pioneer of the well building standard. That is where I hang out when I'm not in Norway, helping to lead research. And we also believe this is just the beginning. So some of the other work that we do is led by our research in the Well Living Lab. This is at Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota. Super cold, kind of like Norway. And there's actually tons of Norwegians in Minnesota, if you didn't know this already. So we really encourage you to visit. But this is a place where we're testing out all the different concepts around environmental stimuli, light, acoustics, temperature, humidity, filtration. And we're testing people day in, day out to find out what happens to the eye depending on light sources. What happens when people are moving and interacting differently on their stress levels. We're trying to understand issues of water quality and exposure to different air quality issues. We also are opening a lab in Beijing, which we're very excited about. The research behind this goes to support the well building standard, but it also goes to support new technology and offerings that we have in the market. And we're very proud that in the last month we just released Darwin, which is a home intelligence system that has to do with connecting the Internet of Things for wellness in your home. Air quality, water quality, sleep issues. And we're, of course, looking to build that out and very excited about some pretty big announcements coming as Delos increasingly moves into wellness real estate and technology platforms. So we very much invite you to be part of our family. And I would be remiss without showing some incredible pictures. I learned long ago that not everyone wants just statistics from a doctor. So these are some of the projects that are underway. ARUP was one of our first. I'm proud to announce that ARUP and Delos have actually announced a partnership in which we will be testing and validating through post-occupancies and pre-occupancy studies. So we have 70,000 people surveyed right now and multiple languages in multiple building typologies. So we're very excited to work with our partners there. And this was a study in which they were able to actually link some outcomes directly on occupant experience with satisfaction, and then, of course, overall cost. I can't encourage you enough. I can give you stats all day around the improvements and our case studies around the world, but each case study is, in some ways, very different and very unique to the environment, to the client, to the drivers, to the KPIs, or maybe even the health performance indicators. So as a researcher, we really encourage you to seek us out, talk to us. We'll tell you who our partners are, what universities we're working with, because we really want to drive these numbers and learn more. Mirvac was the first client of ours that Deloitte came to them and said, we refuse to move into a building unless it's well certified. So we had a big developer come on the scene, really rethinking about how they're going to attract new clients. There is your obesity prevention strategy. This is the air quality monitoring, actually telling people what the air quality is. In China, they're not waiting for it, right? They have their own sensors on their phones, and if the office is not the right levels, and believe me, you can feel it because buildings breathe for you in China, they're going to social media. We're starting to see this happen with air quality as well. So people are being more empowered with data to understand how buildings are performing, and yes, there are a lot of implications on design and construction for that. These are just great examples of biophilia, stimuli management. I love this example. This is our first project in China. So that PM 2.5, that super tiny stuff, we asked for it to be about 15. That's our level. In China, regularly at 500 regularly throughout the day. In the US, our highest level was like 172 for one day. So what they've done in innovations to bring better air quality, and you can bet that they use that to market, brand, and attract people, and they consider this one of the most successful showrooms in the world because they invite people in to use their space and experience wellness, which is pretty exciting. And then Bezos France, I just love what they've done to recreate park space, to recreate and to manage stimuli better, to engage people. And throughout today, I've really been in awe of some of the amazing examples that other architects, designers, and construction companies have shared with us around thinking that human beings are just not supposed to stare at a white blank wall. So rethinking about how to bring that in, and of course, use of light. So I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. This is the end of 4 weeks of travel for me, and as I was saying, I saved the best for last. So as, that's international saying, right? So as a doctor, as someone who studies this, as a researcher, you don't want me to build your building. I love drawing on napkins. It's a lot of fun to hang out with you. But at the end of the day, we desperately need you. In fact, we have leaders in public health and former Surgeon Generals saying that you actually are public health advocates. It's too late for us to say that we can do this alone. Physicians are never trained to design healthy places. They were just trained to treat. So we need you deeply. We welcome you into this. And I also just wanted to thank some of the partners that brought us here. I'm so excited to be at a construction conference talking around wellness and well-being, so thank you so much to the conference organizers for tracking us down and having us here. It's been quite a pleasure. And I really also want to thank the Norwegian Green Building Council, who has been an early partner bringing us here. There's a lot more information, education. Part of our work here is this is not an American standard. This has to be international in scope. And so it's some of our leaders, consultants that have brought this here that make it possible. And so I'd also be remiss not to point out my friend and colleague, Henriette, who has been a leader in this from the very first time that I came over to Europe. She has found me and said, let's bring it to Norway. So it's quite a pleasure to be here today and to share this with you. Thank you.